You wouldn't last 5 minutes with this ushanka in Siberia. People's worst came out of them in those moments.
And you even got onto Russian television.
And just like this, I was back in Moscow, Russia.
What was your first impression after being gone for 20 years?
Growing up in Moscow, I thought I knew what cold was. Well, that wasn't real cold. The real cold was in Siberia, in Tomsk, where you grew up. And so even though like the cliche is, oh, you know, Siberia is freezing, it literally is freezing, like to the bone, chilling, to where, you know, you go outside, you take a breath, and then if you're not careful, it kind of constricts your airways to where you can't really talk. The only time that I would go outside, aside from going to work, which more on that later, that didn't last very long. But aside from that, I would just go to the store. And this is where, you know, winter or not, this was not something that I was used to. Here, to buy 5 things, I literally had to go to 5 stores. And the last thing I thought I would miss about America would be Walmart. But that's what it was. Like, you know, I just being able to walk in and get everything you need in one shopping trip.
Yeah, that's so convenient and we take it for granted.
Sure do.
But once there is no Walmart and you need to spend all this time just getting groceries and then toilet paper and shampoo in a different place, it adds up.
Yeah, and fruits and vegetables, you go to a separate lariok, which is a little tiny wooden house usually with a window where a seller has some kind of food. It could be also prepared food, but vegetables as well. Going to the store and asking a question, you expected rudeness. Rudeness was kind of the default, kind of like, you know, how much are the apples? And for the clerk to tell me, you know, the prices are right there, can't you see? You know, that was quite normal. And actually that was sort of nice, you know, like at least they pointed out the prices to me. They didn't ignore me. That was, you know, speaking of cold, the whole thing about, you know, in one of your videos, you talked about, you know, did America change your life or are you still frozen? I forgot how chilling it could be to have somebody really give you a cold shoulder. What was it like for you coming back after just 2 years? Потому что ты мне говорил, что ты как бы тоже уже отвыкла от всего этого хамства.
Of course, I also saw the difference in attitudes between the US and Russia. But you kind of learn to navigate and focus on what you need.
Cultural chameleon.
And just get yourself your apples or bread and get out and go on with your life.
So after 20 years in the US, I was just so used to if a person is walking towards me, nodding and smiling. It just you know, it seems normal, I think, to most of you who are watching this in the West. But doing that, I wouldn't be received well. Or, like you said, people would think that I want something. And that's the last thing I want, especially from people in police uniform. Ничего добавить, да?
Все сказал вроде.
So the way you help me navigate that, you make eye contact only when necessary, no small talk, don't ask questions, can I pay with a card? You know, there's a lot of talk about how cards, you know, Russian citizens' cards don't work in Europe. Well, my American card didn't work in Russia. I had to carry cash with me, and that was different. That's something that I also wasn't used to.
And cash is наличные.
Which is an adjective that could be a noun, and the slang expression would be наличка. What you had on your hands was a grown man who came back to his 16-year-old self. Literally, my knowledge of Russia and Soviet Union really was at that age. So if we would compare my stay in Russia to a train ride, I certainly was an unaccompanied minor, and the conductor that happened to come along with me was amazing.
I was your проводница.
Да.
Or проводник. if you're talking about a male conductor?
In English, it's all conductor, right? But Russian is a gendered language, so I would be проводник, but she was my проводница. When you travel, you may have seen, some other Russian vloggers, maybe even Bald and Bankrupt. They get on the Russian train, and you get that hot tea in подстаканник, which is under the glass thing, under the glass holder. And I feel like the whole experience. You gave me the hot tea and the warm blankets.
Пуховик.
Пуховик in some cases literally, except I never got a пуховик blanket. I got a пуховик jacket.
Пуховик is made of puch, down, and we call пуховик a jacket in Siberia. And you were really surprised to hear this
I was
word.
surprised to hear that because we also had пуховик in Moscow, but it was never a jacket. It was always a blanket. So when I heard they were going to get me a пуховик, I thought they were going to get me a blanket. I was like, how's they going to help me outside?
You just bundle up in пуховик in a blanket and you just chill outside.
And you just kind of walk around like this. Yeah, it was pretty close because the thing was thick. But it helped me stay warm. And I did get the Ushanka hat. And Ushanka comes from the word уши, which is plural for ucha. And it means ears.
Ushanka has long ears with strings attached to them, and for children it's common to tie those strings underneath. It protects the children's ears.
So it's just for children, huh? So why did y'all get me that hat? Why didn't you tell me that I'm not supposed to tie the strings? I mean, in all seriousness, I could tell that I was getting a side eye, especially from like men who were too macho to tie those strings. I could tell they were freezing, but sometimes they wouldn't even put the ears down because you can flip the ears up and tie them at the top there.
Mm-hmm.
Сейчас, подожди. This is like bonus content for patrons. Okay, so y'all like my Kraken outfits, right? So this would be like the Pacific Northwest version of Ushanka. Like you wouldn't last 5 minutes with this Ushanka in Siberia, but that's the idea. There's your ears, уши, Kraken, and the strings are usually thinner, and you kind of put it on and you tie it underneath.
And there is even a saying about dressing warmly. Сибиряк не тот, кто не мерзнет, а тот, кто тепло одевается. A Siberian is not someone who isn't freezing, but the one who dresses warmly. When growing up, I had to wear lots of layers in such weather.
So what were they called? Those tights?
Ритузы.
Oh, wow.
Like a special term, a special slang.
Yes.
For warm tights that you're wearing underneath your pants in Siberia.
Rituzy is like totally like from another life. Yes, I remember hearing that word, and I think those would probably come out once the entire winter in Moscow. But it sounds like that was a regular thing for you in winter months as a girl.
It's like thermal underwear.
Yeah, колготки. So the actual word is колготы, да? So, but because mostly kids wear those, they're called колготки, and it's not uncommon to see both boys and girls wear those tights, and they're sewn in a certain way with those lines. We'll put it up on the screen for you.
Колготки is very practical because it's a combination of tight pants with socks.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you don't need socks,
You're
really.
wearing колготки, then rituzy, then winter pants, and wool socks, and валенки on top.
Then you're ready for
You're
minus
good.
30. It wasn't like that every single day, but it was like that for much longer stretches that I was used to. We had our baby with us, and so to walk, как выгулить. So to take him for a walk, it took longer to get him dressed than the actual walk, because even with all the bundling up, it got cold so fast.
When we took our little one outside in snow, we used sled. Remember, instead of a stroller.
Yeah, we had to adapt it was literally a Soviet era sled, like I remember growing up. The entire, walk consisted of getting dressed for literally half an hour, with little kids, "Oh, I don't want to put on the second pair of pants. Oh, I don't want to put on the warm hat and the scarf," because the scarf was a big deal. You load the ushanka up, but then you tie it all up with the scarf, and the child is like in this cocoon that's, windproof and snowproof. But because he's not moving, like he can't really move in all that. So you put him in the sled, you pull him around, and then he complains about being cold, 5-10 minutes later. So we just go around the building once or twice, go back upstairs.
And you need to dress yourself up before you start dressing up your child. And when you finish dressing everyone up, you're already sweating.
And we have a saying in Russian, "7 potов сошло."
It means you sweat so much that you are losing 7 sweats. So in order to get to my home city, we had to take a 4-hour flight from Moscow to Tomsk.
Fun story. When we first met and you said you were from Tomsk, I was like, "Oh yeah, Omsk. I've heard of that." So that's what I was thinking
That's
to myself.
all right. It's just one letter. Tomsk, Omsk.
Right.
Easily confused.
But totally different cities and totally different places. And
Yeah.
I feel embarrassed now that, my future spouse, I completely misplaced her geographically.
That's all right.
And this was my opportunity to actually
Yeah.
correct that geographical confusion, but I didn't realize that we were going to a different continent, from Europe to Asia. And the place that we landed was not too far from Kazakhstan.
Yes, Siberia is huge. If you want to travel from Moscow to Vladivostok, then it would be an 8-hour flight. So traveling to Tomsk wasn't so bad.
Что я проголодался. Давай какую-нибудь еду, будем рассказывать, есть.
Не надо, зубы будут грязные, ты чё?
For me, it was, I'm only there for 2 years. I can make it through 2 winters. But you grew up there and you went to school and college. How did you survive?
Well, when I was growing up, it was post-Soviet times. And I should tell you a secret.
Uh-oh.
My parents kept bunnies. And those were not just for kisses and huggies.
What were
I
they
was
for?
feeding them, I was playing with them.
So they were
And
pets.
then when they were big enough, they all of a sudden escaped into the woods. And I never guessed what happened to them, but I was wondering how we got meat in our soup, or how did we get
Poor
bunny
bunnies.
heads. So that's what kept us alive in those hard post-Soviet years. And of course, now all kinds of warm clothes are widely available in Siberia. You can buy a thick coat that'll keep you really warm. And also remember valenki. Valenki are traditional boots that are worn in severe winter in Siberia. They're usually made of compressed sheep wool.
I don't remember when those as a kid, but outside of, being a kid, nobody really wore them in Moscow. But sounds like people, even grown-ups, wear them in Siberia.
I wasn't shy to wear valenki when it was -30. When you're waiting on a bus stop for half an hour or even longer and buses keep breaking down.
You're talking about those famous marshrutka buses, right? And those are breaking down. I thought those were more like amphibious vehicles, like they go everywhere.
Everything breaks down.
There's this debate among Russian vloggers. If you ask Zach the Russian, who is from the Far East, he and Natasha's Adventure, they always talked about marshrutkas as those little minivans. And that's how I knew them in Moscow too. We are the furthest you can think. But right in the middle of the country, Tomsk, Novosibirsk, those were what? They were actual buses, right?
Yeah, just small buses with about 30 people capacity.
Yeah.
So it's not like a huge bus, but
it's not a dozen people
very
like you can pack in the van.
compact.
So now you know that a marshrutka could be either or. Well, all it means is it's a vehicle that goes on a certain route, which is marshrut in Russian.
A route is marshrut in Russian, and marshrutka is
Так мы же уже все сказали.
Okay.
Что просто раз повторять? I can teach Russian. You know, I don't have a degree, but I have something.
And drivers in marshrutkas are really good. They can drive with one hand and pass the change with the other hand.
Yeah, there wasn't. There were no like passes that you could use. The bus takes off and then he doles out the change. If you want to talk about bunnies and drivers, there's a connection. I remember going on one of those marshrutka buses, and there was a sign right in the window, that the glass that separates the driver from the passengers, and it said something like "Водитель," which is a driver. "Водитель не Дед Мазай, зайцев не возит." So заяц is bunny in Russian. And Ded Mazai is this character from a children's book that used to transport bunnies from one side of the river, from one bank to the other, when they were stranded there.
Zаяц is a slang word. Zаяc is a slang word that's used for a person who wants a free ride. Zаяc.
It may even stem from that children's story, to where, you know, those bunnies certainly didn't pay anything for the ride. So one thing that I was not expecting is that there is literally about a foot of ice and snow compacted on the road throughout the entire winter. And winters are longer too. At least it stays colder longer. Everybody drives on that. Passenger vehicles, buses, those famous marshrutka buses. And then, you know, when it all comes out, you can literally, it's like a layer. And that's something I've never seen in Moscow, and certainly not in places like Seattle.
Was there anything that you felt was familiar to when you were a teenager, when you were just leaving USSR?
It's a good thing that you were the one who had to go back, because if I had to go back for some reason and I would go on my own, I don't know if I could make it. And with you, I felt you anchored me, you know.
Спасибо. Спасибо. Thank you.
Спасибо тебе, дорогая. On the one hand, yes, I was sacrificing my program and, you know, going back to the country that I fled as a child. But at the same time, you sort of like carried me through it, you know. It worked out okay in the end. But not without adventure. In some ways, there was a lot of new things, you know. Technically, it was a capitalist country, but the customer service that I described, that was pretty much non-existent and actually almost flipped on its head. I grew up with that, and it was strangely comforting, because that's in connection to Russia or the Soviet Union. That's all I knew, and it was right there beneath the thin layer of, you know, modern advertisements. And some comfort that Russia had acquired over the time that I've been gone. It was all right there. And I experienced it even more when I had to go and visit some government offices. Yeah. Olga talked to you last time about the two types of passports.
Internal passport, внутренний passport, and travel passport, загранпаспорт.
I only had one of those. It wasn't the internal variety. The internal one, you know, I had when I was a kid, but then I like didn't even have it anymore. So in order to get it back, I had to spend literally 2 days at this government office. In which was at the funny part was it wasn't like some grand, you know, building. It was at the bottom of a Khrushchevka building, where you would go in and like there's dusty offices where everybody's sitting there kind of gloomy, and it was just like being in the USSR again. People's worst came out of them in those moments. You didn't see it as much on the street. Maybe you saw it on the bus and at the store a little bit, but there it was like really laid bare on full display. Sometimes, you know, it was borderline getting into a fight over who is going to be next to visit the government official that's going to stamp your, you know, your passport. It was just like growing up.
Wow, that's interesting.
On the one hand, it was different to me as somebody who lived in the West for a long time, but it was so comforting to see that the country that I left didn't go anywhere. You were my conductor to the new Russia that was at the surface level, and I felt completely lost in. But then when I was on my own, I could connect to the old Soviet stuff that was still pretty close. If I operated on that level, I don't think anybody could tell that I'm from somewhere else. But it was different when I went to look for work. I thought that I could easily pass for somebody from Russia just by connecting to my old Soviet, memories. And
The
it worked.
language helps you.
Yeah. So my language was okay.
So what was different, I think?
What was different was, как это будет, менталитет. Mental state? Не, неправильно. Mentality, right? My American mentality. That's something that was a layer that grew on top of my original Soviet kid personality. I went to a number of job interviews and it didn't go very well. Even though I knew how to interview, quote unquote, and I would start talking myself up, what we're taught to do in the West, or at least in the United States, I could see the negative reaction right away. They would almost like, upon hearing that, they would try to challenge me. First of all, to prove it, but also like, oh, if you're so smart, so why are you applying for this job kind of thing? It took one company exec to recognize my value as an American or as somebody from the West, to see past my failings in terms of interviewing and in terms of like maybe even some skill sets.
Wow, it blows my mind how much effort you put into those interviews. And that's really cool that you realized what was going wrong. You saw those clues, you picked up on their body language, their reaction, and you actually realized that your communication styles.
It was a mismatch.
Yeah.
I realized that there was a mismatch, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was already in gear, and that's all I knew how to interview. When I was 16, I didn't do a lot of interviewing. So I didn't know how to interview with Russian or Soviet mentality. The recognition was there. I couldn't do anything about it.
Well, it takes time to learn from another culture and
cultural agility.
Yeah,
it's hard to acquire.
It takes some time to develop cultural agility. I've been reading a really good book, The Culture Map by Erin Meyer, and it reminded me of that. I have a quote that I would like to share. Today, whether we work in Dusseldorf or Dubai, New York or New Delhi, we are all part of a global network where success requires navigating through wildly different cultural realities. Unless we know how to decode other cultures and avoid easy to fall into cultural traps, we are easy prey to misunderstanding, needless conflict, and ultimate failure.
Yep, I sure tasted some of that failure. That's a good one.
In the United States, we are used to egalitarian style of communication in companies, where you can ask any question and get into discussion with higher level managers. But in Russia, it's hierarchy. Just talking and getting into open discussions is not usual, and it's considered rude and arrogant.
Yeah. And it could be a fireable offense. I was in personnel, so I got to really be immersed in it. I was somewhere in the middle. So there were bosses above me, and then I was supervising a group of workers, both in the office and in the field. And both me trying to level with, my subordinates was frowned upon, and me trying to level with my bosses was a no-no. I really had to look up to my bosses and look down to people I supervised. And the irony of it is they hired me to change that. And yet, whenever I tried to do it, there was a lot of pushback. I instituted a program to where I wanted to offer free lunches to workers for them to get pirashki, which is this sort of a Russian. You had a video about it. It's a pie.
Everyone knows what pirashki is. A pie with filling. What kind of filling did you get them?
Oh, meat, definitely, because they worked hard, and so I wanted them to get protein and something really hearty, and I got them. I think was it either coffee or juice or maybe both.
And they were not happy about you.
Compot. I got them compot. Like we contracted with this restaurant, which actually was a pretty fancy restaurant, and they were like, "You want us to make pirashki? Okay, we can do that, but it'll cost you." I'm like, "I have a budget. Let's do it." So compot is you take fruit or dried fruit and you boil it in water. It has some caloric and I guess vitamin
and we
value.
put sugar inside of compot, so it has
additional calories. And it still quenches your thirst. I guess it's like drinking Coca-Cola to quench your thirst, and in some ways it works.
But it's healthier.
It's healthier because it has some fruits, yeah. So yeah, compot и пирожок, but they were like, why is he doing that? Even though it was a free benefit, they didn't have to go out and buy their lunch. It was brought to them. I literally, sometimes I delivered it myself, and they're like, he's weird. Why is he doing that?
Oh my God, this is such a valuable experience for you.
There's one guy in the office. We were same level, so I felt like I could ask him what's going on? Why aren't they happy? And his answer was, "Ты в России, чувак." And that means, dude, you're in Russia. He said, you just think differently. And I'm like, what do you mean differently? He's like, you think like an American. And you are. And at that moment, it kind of hurt to be called, because I tried really hard to be like everybody else and try to embrace my original homeland. "Ты в России, чувак" is something that I remember to this day.
Wow, thank you for sharing your experience, honey. I didn't realize that was such an adventure for you, and you learned so much along the way.
In so little time. It didn't last very long, because after a month of work, there was still no salary. And they were like, yeah, it's about 6 months behind. And I was like, 6 months behind? I don't know if this company is going to be in business in 6 months. So why am I going to invest all that time when, I can do something freelance?
And you started looking for freelance opportunities like translation services and
teaching Russian.
And teaching Russian and English. So we took turns doing those freelance kind of jobs, and you even got onto Russian television.
Yes. So my wife, my conductor, my guiding light, she used to work at a company that got in touch with her about a interpretation opportunity on live TV, and she was busy, and she was like, my husband is looking for work. At the time, there was an American singer and actress in town, and they were really scrambling because they literally, in the entire city of Tomsk, they didn't have anybody with American English skills. That was important to them because, she's from America, so it would have been much better. Here's a short clip of what it was like.
What do they tell you about Siberia, about cold? What are they scared with?
They say, why are you going to Siberia in March?
Почему в Россию?
And I said, to make some good music.
Чтобы написать хорошую музыку и спеть хорошую музыку.
Ну, о медведях не говорили.
Anything about the bears?
No.
Ничего такого не было.
People always say, vodka, watch out, too much vodka. Don't drink too much
Все
vodka.
говорят, осторожно, там будет очень много водки. Не пейте много водки.
Ну, что есть, то есть, действительно.
Did I miss the place where I really grew up, which was the United States? Walmart being one thing, that's a convenience. But one thing I really missed, I realized through that experience that you just saw, I missed speaking English. We spoke Russian at home. I spoke Russian at the store. I spoke Russian at work. English became, my native language. I really fell in love with it. And except for little
Mm.
opportunities here and there, I didn't really speak to native speakers. Here is Nicole Henry was really like, I felt like I was at home. Being at home in the country I was born, I finally felt at home while
Mm.
speaking to somebody in English.
Wow, that's interesting how language is connecting us.
Yeah. No wonder we want to continue teaching Russian despite everything. There is really a chance to bring people together with language.
Mm.
It would be cool to, I think it would be cool to learn Ukrainian, maybe in 2023. Not something we can teach, but maybe learn it. The whole thing was an adventure. It was quite a ride in the sense that I really needed a guide. I really needed a conductor or проводник, проводница, who helped me navigate some of these trickier cultural moments. The cultural chameleon I was not when I first arrived there. But after 2 years and 2 months, when the homestay requirement was fulfilled, which was the promise you made to the American government before you would ever return, it was time to go back.
And this time I was coming not as a student just to have fun and to study, but on an immigrant visa. Now it was time for my adventure, and you were going to be my guide.
To learn what happened to Olga, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and we'll see you next time.
Пока!
Go Kraken. Здесь Kraken или здесь? Где Kraken? Здесь NHL, да?
Здесь S буква, а здесь NHL.
Okay. And just like this, не щелкнулся. And just like this, ну что ж такое?
И не тряси стулом.
And just like this,